This podcast is a healthy place, a thriving place, a never-ending harmony of making, doing, growing, trying, laughing, running, living. Abu was sick of it.
Get me out of here. Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a little bit about ourselves along the way. My name's Abu, and as always, I'm joined by Obssa. Oh my goodness. Obssa, we're here to talk about a brand new book. We've completed our journeys through the silos of Silo and Wool by Hugh Howey. And today we're starting a brand new journey. We are reading the first 4 chapters of A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers.
Yeah.
How exciting.
And what a tone shift.
What a tone shift.
Yeah,
we'll get into it.
For sure.
Indeed. Before we get into it, quick bit of housekeeping, folks. As we just stated, we're covering the first 4 chapters of A Psalm for the Wild-Built, so spoiler warning. Make sure you've completed the reading and read those 4 chapters before you continue listening today.
And as always, we encourage you to read along with us, share your thoughts, and email us at sci-fi-bookclubpod@loreparty.com. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi-bookclubpod. We've got free reading guides, discussion questions, bonus clips, and bloopers. And it's also where you can find our Discord, where we like to keep the nerdy sci-fi discussions going, along with you fellow readers in the community.
You can find all of those links in the show notes below. So check that out after you're done listening. All right, here's the game plan, folks. You know the drill with these book club episodes. Obssa, you and I are going to start today by summarizing the chapters from the assigned reading, chapters 1 through 4. Then we'll share some first impressions we have of the book thus far.
Right.
Maybe even get into some prediction territory and call the election.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, we will wrap up, as we always do, by diving deeper into the themes and ideas and the background of this book in our sci-fi analysis. So before we get into all of that, let's take a quick breather. Don't go anywhere, dear listener. When we come back, we're diving into the pages of this wonderful book.
Welcome back, listeners. Let's jump in and start with a brief summary of the first 4 chapters of A Psalm for the Wild-Built.
Mm-hmm.
In chapter 1, we meet our protagonist, sibling Dex, a monk who lives and works at the Meadow Den Monastery in the continent of Panga's only city. Dex has grown restless in their current vocation and decides to leave the city and become a traveling tea monk. One source of this discontent with their life involves the sound of crickets, or rather the lack of such sounds in the hustle and bustle of city life. I bet it's nice to fall asleep listening to crickets, they thought. After saying their goodbyes to friends and colleagues, Dex was given their very own ox bike and tea wagon, and they set out on their new venture. Apprenticeship or formal training be damned.
Bold.
Who needs it?
Bold.
Reality quickly sets in, however, during an super awkward, I should say, first customer interaction with a woman who's not only lost her cat, but her marriage as well.
Oh, God.
And it turns out being a tea monk is more than just listen to people give tea. By the end of that conversation, it seems that the woman is, in fact, the tea monk therapist for Dex.
That's right. That's right. The tables have turned in a very awkward way.
Definitely turned. But Dex is committed to this new life and carries on with her travels and tea.
We then jump into chapter 2, where we time skip.
Yep.
We are now 2 years later. We join a much more experienced and well-traveled sibling Dex as they are revisiting Inkthorn, a village in the woodlands where people live in these like beautiful tree houses, and they don't live on the forest floor in order to like preserve the nature there.
So great is their respect for the critters in the soil.
Yes.
Yeah.
A theme we'll touch on a little bit later in our analysis. So obviously 2 years later, Dex's abilities have grown. Their renown has grown. They're quite well known. Folks in Inkthorn are waiting for Dex's arrival.
Absolutely.
And we see their interactions. We see this experience that Dex has gained in the last 2 years in their interactions with Miss Jules, for example, or the hot dad, Mr. Cody. Cody, I think,
That's
is
right.
not the hottest of names, but I
Yeah.
trust that he's a good looking guy.
For sure.
But here's the thing, Obssa. Everything is not perfect. And this isn't happily ever after for Dex. This is chapter 2 is not where the book ends,
Yeah.
incidentally. Dex once again finds themselves thinking of crickets. They still have not been able to find these crickets. And they are once again restless with their current life as a tea monk now.
Yeah.
As a pretty well-known tea monk helping people.
In fact, the best tea monk, according to many.
Hello.
There you have it.
Getting free meals left and right every town they
That's
go
right.
into. So later, once they've left Inkthorn and on the road to their next destination, Hammerstrike, Dex makes a sudden decision to change course. And instead they head into the protected wilderness zone in search of crickets. Specifically, they're headed to this old hermitage that's been abandoned since the end of the Factory Age.
Right.
After this grueling ride through the dense and inhospitable wilderness on their ox bike, Dex decides to camp in this cozy clearing for the night to relax. They shower, they make a meal, things are looking good. They're
Yeah.
feeling good. They're on a new
feeling
adventure.
pretty naked, if I recall.
They're feeling butt naked,
Yeah.
and things are great
Things are as jolly as they could be.
until this curious robot named Mosscap stumbles into this
Oh
clearing.
my.
Hello.
Yeah.
Butt naked. Recall. Can robots be turned on? Because
So in chapters 3 and 4, following this first meeting with Mosscap, Dex and Mosscap get to know each other a little
Yeah.
bit more. At first, they're certainly cautious and eventually a little bit more curious and open.
yeah,
This is absolutely a groundbreaking moment as no human and robot have interacted in over 200 years. Ever since robots gained sentience and decided to leave human civilization
Yeah.
and strike out on their own. Dex learns that Mosscap has in fact been sent by the robots to check in with humanity,
okay.
as the robots are curious how humans have fared since they have left. Mosscap wants Dex to be its guide as it travels around human settlements and learns what it can about humans and their needs, but Dex is perhaps understandably resistant.
Yeah.
What
get it.
people need is impossible to figure out. And this is also the first time they've interacted with a robot.
Right. That's a lot to ask on a
lot to-
first meeting.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I think this is within 30 minutes.
Right. Can I travel with you for the next unknown number of months?
Exactly.
It's a wild request. But also, I really appreciated the reason Mosscap asks to travel with Dex
Yeah.
is because Mosscap is like, oh my gosh, you're a tea monk.
Who better?
Who better to understand what humanity
Yes.
needs than a person who helps them in their time of need
Yes.
by offering tea and a shoulder to cry on?
Yes.
The inverse is also true, though, because Dex is absolutely correct. Every need is so elusive and different.
Yes.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I can't help you just figure out, quote unquote, what humanity needs.
Right.
I barely know what these people need
Right.
when they come to me.
Yeah.
It's so elusive and ever changing.
Yeah.
You're on an impossible mission. So
Yes.
I love that I can understand both perspectives.
Totally. And you get the sense that Dex is also a little bit insecure and not totally
Yeah.
certain that they're the best qualified to even, go on this endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the end, they do agree to a compromise.
Oh, okay.
Mosscap will accompany Dex to the Hermitage since it is a long and dangerous road through the wilderness.
Hello.
And in return, the monk will tell the robot all they know about humanity. The two end up beginning their journey to the Hermitage, and Dex learns about robot culture, like the proper pronouns for robots,
Yeah.
it, and how robots keep in touch, leaving notes, as well as what professions robots have, which
Right.
are pretty interesting.
Very interesting.
Highly specialized. You'll recall
hyperfixations.
lots of fixations. You'll recall the robot who spent years off in the wilderness studying moss growing on rocks, I believe. So
Incredible.
it is really remarkable
Yeah.
how the robot civilization has continued to evolve in the
It
absence
is.
of humanity.
Very fascinating stuff. I also really liked this was right at the end of chapter 4. Mosscap kind of admits that it's insecure about itself
Yeah.
because it's not like other robots.
Right.
Mosscap is a
Right.
generalist.
Yes.
Mosscap wants to study
Everything.
everything and anything that
Yeah,
fascinates it in this
absolutely.
moment. And Dex is the one that comforts Moscow
Yes.
and says, I don't see what's wrong with that.
Yeah,
Why do you feel like you're the outcast here?
exactly.
And I liked that it was clearly a moment of camaraderie for both of them.
Absolutely.
Because on some level, Dex, I think, also feels like a bit of an outcast from
Right.
human society.
Right.
And thus is out here in the wilderness, like escaping it
Yeah.
in whatever way. And we'll talk more about Dex's motivations in our analysis.
Yeah.
But I liked that there was an immediate bond these two could share
Right.
over feeling like outsiders within their own groups.
Right.
So with our summary out of the way, how are you feeling? Oh, so I'm curious.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the first half of this book?
Yes. For as short as these, as the book is, and these first 4 chapters were, it evoked a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts in me. And I think what I'm most struck by is just how unlike any other book I've read this is, like,
Oh.
ever.
Interesting.
I think the closest that came to mind for me was The Tao of Pooh, as in Winnie the Pooh by Benjamin Hoff, which is a fantastic...
I was thinking the other Pooh. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you for clarifying.
I needed to clarify. The Tao of Pooh, the other... No, it's a very different book. In any case, I would certainly recommend that book for anyone into Eastern thought and philosophy, which feels pretty relevant to this book. There's a deep sense of mindfulness that emanates throughout, and it's really touching, even inspiring, I would say.
Yeah.
As a super brief aside, I would highly recommend the audiobook. I think some people are perhaps split on this question, but I found the narration to be super captivating and just really in tune with the spirit of the book.
Yeah.
In any case, I think part of what was so satisfying for me in just these first 4 chapters is how relatable Dex is in just so many ways. They absolutely remind me of myself when I was a bit younger, and currently someone in my life that I deeply cherish. I think that experience of just not knowing exactly where to go or why exactly is pretty universal. And I think it speaks to a lot of our experiences.
Oh, yeah.
I also find that the book evokes contemplation and reflection without being super prescriptive about it.
Yes.
It's all kind of in the mundane and everyday moments, and it's also just such a joyful book. You can take this passage, quote, "The disciples of Chol had built them a tiny sanctuary, a mobile burrow that begged Dex to come in and be still." Or this one about Dex's tea kettle. "It was joyfully chubby, with copper plating and a round glass window in both sides, so you could watch the boiling bubbles dance." It's just so cozy, so like warming and just lovely. And, on the other hand, it's a little removed from the world that I know.
Certainly.
But I think we should dream of a better one and not just convince ourselves of its impossibility. So I'm loving this book. Yeah, tell me what you're thinking so far.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with all of the above. I'm loving this book.
Yeah.
Perhaps even more than you. I'm gushing about this book.
Yeah.
I've become an advocate for this book. I have recommended it in the past week or so to no less than like 4 or 5 people.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Quite aggressively.
Yeah.
Like to the point where I was like,
kind of ironic.
Should I buy you a copy? Maybe I'll just ship you a copy. Do you want my copy?
The copy's on its way.
It's on the way. I expect your book report on my desk.
That's right.
By Monday morning.
Yeah.
So I'm really loving this book. And we were talking about this on the ride over to the studio today, but I don't know if it's just maybe the timing is right, but the coziness is just hit so perfectly.
Yeah. S-tier coziness for sure.
Like maybe it's because of the current year we're in and the political climate.
It's 2025.
It's 2025. Yeah. It just maybe is exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
Just the cup of tea that I needed in this moment where every time I open my news app, I am scared and sad and feel lonely.
Yeah.
And then I opened this book and it felt like getting a hug from Becky Chambers, getting a hug from Dex and a cup of tea.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I think, speaking of Becky Chambers, I do want to give credit where credit is due. I think the writing is subtle and simple, but it does not lack artistry.
Absolutely.
There is depth here in the coziness that is very clearly intentional.
Yes.
And even the passages that you shared are written in such a way where like the kettle is round and cozy, and there's no harsh edges in this book intentionally.
Right.
I also just really enjoyed inhabiting for 4 short chapters a world full of people who care.
Yeah.
People who have everyday problems that can't necessarily be solved with a cup of tea and by spending time with Dex, but certainly those problems can feel more manageable.
Yeah.
You know? And I certainly agree with some of the criticism out there that this is maybe a hopelessly optimistic story and setting. But for the moment, for my read of this book in this moment, I'm fine with that, actually.
Yeah.
I'm okay being transported to this world.
Totally.
So I'm having a great time. And I think actually the short, sweet acknowledgement at the start of my copy perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to say. It says, quote, "For anybody who could use a break," end quote. And that's the sales pitch of this book.
Absolutely.
I think that perfectly captures what this book is about. I also want to acknowledge that just because it's very optimistic and unrealistic in some sense, doesn't mean that the themes and ideas that this book is toying with don't apply to real life, you know, to our lives, to current humanity. I think actually the ideas in this book that we've gotten in just these first 4 chapters are quite poignant.
Yeah.
It's not just like surface level fluff stuff to make you feel good about everything.
Right.
There's also lovely bits of writing that I think capture some of these big ideas.
Right.
For example, I really liked that part where we learned that 50% of Panga, of this continent, is protected wilderness zone. Quote, "Humans had a knack for throwing things out of balance. Finding a limit they'd stick to was victory enough." End quote.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
That's amazing.
Yeah, totally.
Like that encapsulates this idea like, oh, so one species, humanity, gets half of this continent. Every other species gets the other half. Isn't that unfair? But the reality is like getting humans to even commit to a limit is victory in and of itself. Yeah. And even that feels like a huge win.
Totally.
And then, of course, I loved every interaction that Dex had, even the awkward one in chapter 1.
It was really
I
sweet.
loved every interaction, interaction that Dex had with their customers. In particular, this line about Mrs. Jules, I kid you not, Obssa, legitimately made me tear up.
Yeah.
And because, I don't know, for me, it like served, I'm a workaholic. It's a well-known problem. And this line just kind of made me pause. And it was a reminder to myself that it's okay to slow down and chill sometimes. Quote, "Her shoulders visibly slumped. She'd always had the ability to relax them. She'd just needed permission to do so." End quote.
Oof.
I'm like, again, I'm getting a little watery-eyed even just rereading that.
Yeah.
So I've been gushing for like, it feels like an hour now. So I'll wrap up by saying this, Obssa. Loving this book. Can't wait to get into the second half of it and get deeper into the conversations between Dex and Moscap. There's already these wonderful ideas about how people and robots and gods are more than the sum of their parts, right? Like,
totally.
We're already touching on some really beautiful ideas that I know we're going to go down a rabbit hole on our next episode. And so I can't wait to continue reading and follow them on their journey.
I would totally agree. I hate to follow that up with a critique of the novel. But
please do.
I feel like just in the spirit of being even-handed, I share all of the kind of wonderful impressions and takes you've got on the book. And to those that say the book is hopelessly optimistic, I would say maybe it's just hopeful. Like, it's okay to be hopeful, you know?
I love that,
But what I will point out, and I think what stood out to me the most as far as a critique goes, is the lack of an antagonist, which is part of what makes this feel materially different than most other, not only sci-fi books, but books I've read in recent years. The future the author presents, I don't think is too utopian, but perhaps it is utopian almost to a fault.
Yeah, that's fair.
As a small tangent, I've been reading this fascinating 2016 book by Wired magazine co-founder Kevin Kelly called The Inevitable, which is about the forces that shape our future.
Okay.
10 years ago, amongst other things, he predicted that companies like Google would be less known for their more familiar services than their new AI technologies,
Hmm.
which I think is proving to be a pretty prescient observation and one that's holding up remarkably well.
Yeah.
But in any case, there's something he wrote that's been at the back of my mind all week. Quote, "A world without discomfort is utopia, but it is also stagnant. A world perfectly fair in some dimensions would be horribly unfair in others.
Hmm.
A utopia has no problems to solve and therefore no opportunities either." He goes even further to say that he has not met a speculative utopia I would want to live in.
Oh.
I'd be bored in utopia.
Oh.
Dystopias, their dark opposites, are a lot more entertaining.
I agree.
Now, I can't say that the world of Dex and Moscap is one I'd hate to live in, but its lack of a clear antagonist, significant danger, or menacing forces does kind of rob Dex in some ways of the opportunity to achieve traditional heroism.
Hmm.
Their hero's journey is much more prosaic, internal, and philosophical.
Yes.
That said, I would give Mr. Kevin Kelly a copy of this book and see what he thinks,
Yeah.
because I don't think that this is a world without opportunities or problems to solve, as we've seen as sibling Dex travels and is helping comfort people in their
Right.
times of sorrow and just in the everyday struggles that we will, I think, forever have.
Yeah.
Life is finite, and
Right.
that presents its own set of challenges, even in the absence of the kind of more traditional antagonisms of,
Yeah.
a villain, per
Right.
se. So
Yeah. I agree.
altogether,
Like hot dad Cody.
yes. Yeah.
My guy's got challenges, right?
He's got some
hot,
problems.
which is just a burden.
Yeah.
You would
Huge
know
burden.
all. You would know all
I
about
get
this,
it.
so
I
you
get
get it.
it.
But in addition to being burdened by his hotness,
Yeah.
he's got two children
He's got
who
two
are keeping
children.
him up at night.
That's right.
And he gets a remedy from Dex to sleep
Yeah, that's
better,
right.
to help him
They've
sleep.
got all the drugs.
All
that
the
you need.
drugs you need.
That's right.
So I agree with a lot of that sentiment,
Yeah.
actually. I'm really glad you shared that, because the utopian dystopian argument totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Stagnation is a worrying thing,
Yeah.
right? If everything is perfect,
Right. Where do
you
we
have
go?
to wonder where the imperfection is,
Yes.
because you don't get to perfect without
Yeah,
imperfection.
that's right.
And so in that sense, like, utopia would be boring,
Yeah.
because there would be nothing to grow
Right.
or achieve
Right.
or overcome.
Yes.
Much of the things that define humanity on sort of a macro level,
Yeah.
but also on a personal level, how
Totally.
people define their own lives.
Yes.
I overcame this thing.
Right.
I completed this incredibly difficult degree and
Right.
accomplished this.
Right.
Many of us define ourselves by the things we overcome and
Yeah.
achieve,
By that struggle.
by the struggle.
Yeah.
And when there is no struggle, when Dex can just say, I'm changing jobs,
Right.
bye,
Right.
that feels like a utopia
Yeah.
for us that are like stuck in the corporate slog of
Yeah.
the world.
Yes.
But the reality is like, okay, so why doesn't everybody just change job? When you think
Right.
too hard about this
Yes.
utopia,
Yes.
you do begin to wonder.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I think altogether, for me, the book absolutely stands as this unique, charming story, and
Yeah.
I'm so happy we're covering it on the podcast.
I agree. I fully agree.
It shows that not all sci-fi requires explosions and this galactic scale, and in that regard, it actually almost, in a weird way, feels more true to life than some examples in the genre.
Yeah. Yeah. The everyday problems, right?
Exactly.
Being hot.
Yeah, I mean, an everyday struggle.
An
for both
everyday
of us.
struggle. It's tough. It's tough out here, folks. I'm really glad you brought that criticism up, though. I think it's completely valid.
All right, well, before we jump into our sci-fi analysis, we'll just have a quick breather.
Yeah.
Take a pause. Listen to an ad or two, perhaps.
Perhaps brew some tea.
And
while
then
you're
we'll
at
come
it.
back and jump into the meta around this novel.
That's right. All right, folks, welcome back. Now that we've completed our summary and shared some of our initial thoughts, let's dive a little bit deeper into A Psalm for the Wild Built. Beginning today with the meta. When we start a new book, we always like to explore how that book got published and learn a little bit more about the author, because I think that context is quite enlightening.
Absolutely.
It certainly was enlightening with Wool, for example,
Yes,
learning that it was a
absolutely.
self-published success.
Yes,
When it comes to A Psalm for the Wild Built, there's an interesting backstory here as well.
agreed.
So, Becky Chambers, the author, made her debut in the literary world with Say it with me, Obssa. A
self-published
self-published novel. Let's
Oh,
fucking
yeah.
go.
Love it.
A self-published novel called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And this was in 2014. And this became a pretty notable success. You know, it won a couple of awards here and there, and it was funded through Kickstarter.
Yeah. You remember
So-
Kickstarter?
I do remember Kickstarter. Incredible. Popping off in 2014,
Oh, yeah,
clearly.
for
so
sure.
so this is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, every author wishes that they could write a book and have it blow up and make their career. To some extent, that happened for Becky Chambers.
Well, certainly 5 years later, the series that book was a part of, the Wayfarers 4-book series,
yeah.
won a Hugo.
Hello.
Which, I mean, come on. For
Incredible.
one of your first published works is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and self-published.
That's right.
Very cool. A huge achievement. Now, speaking of Becky Chambers as an author and the
Yeah.
types of stories that she is known for writing, she's often recognized for pioneering the hope punk genre,
Yeah.
which is a subgenre of speculative fiction that's known for its optimistic tone and its focus on community and resilience. It's the anti-dystopia,
Yeah.
right?
The antidote, really.
The antidote.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of her stories tend to lean in this direction, and she's almost driven to like provide some sort of antidote
Right.
to the rest of sci-fi out
Yes.
there that is so
It's so dark.
like just grim,
Yeah.
dark, dystopian, everything's terrible.
When you think sci-fi, you think Blade Runner, you think Dark City.
1984
and just-
Brave New
yes,
World,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
You think Big Brother, like
Exactly.
all the classics of sci-fi
Yes.
are not happy places to be
No.
for the most part.
Yeah,
And Becky Chambers is kind of flipping that on its head,
absolutely.
which is again kind of a different experience for both
Yeah,
of us
I
as
will
longtime sci-fi
admit, I
readers.
don't know that I've read another hope punk genre.
I don't know.
You know,
Yeah,
this is,
same.
I think, probably my first.
Yeah.
And in that regard, A Psalm for the Wild Built is the first novella in the Monk and Robot series. I
Right.
think we know who the Monk and the Robot are at this
What?
point. I should hope so. It was published in July of 2021, and again, Hugo Award winner.
Damn.
We're talking 2019. We're talking 2022. She's
Wow.
just racking them up.
Racking them up.
And while the book is widely hailed, it's obviously won some pretty prestigious awards. It's
Yes.
not without its critics. I think you touched on this in our summary and in the commentary afterwards. But there are some online that will praise the prose,
Yeah.
but aren't entirely convinced by the future that Chambers presents.
Yes.
That is certainly a recurring theme in the criticism, that the future presented is unrealistic, maybe hopelessly optimistic,
Yeah.
maybe hopeful, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But another vein of criticism is also the lack of a motivating conflict or jeopardy, as I talked about in my critique. As Amal Al-Motar puts it in her NPR book review, it's a world almost completely devoid of threat or precarity.
Mm. And I think those critiques are certainly valid,
Yeah.
you know? Okay, with our meta out of the way, let's move on to our next segment. This one we like to call the dilemma.
That's right.
When we jump into a new book, there's always a core problem at the
Yeah.
issue, the dilemma.
Yes,
That's what the whole story is
Yes.
perhaps about.
naturally.
And there's a couple of things maybe in this book that
Yeah.
we could say are the dilemma at the core of this book.
Yeah.
Again, to your critique from earlier, there isn't like a straight up antagonist.
Yeah.
There isn't like an inciting incident
Right.
that causes a cascading series of events.
Yeah.
It's mostly internal and
Yeah.
it's mostly small scale.
Yeah.
It's people with small people level problems.
Human level, yeah.
One dilemma I think that's for sure present in these first 4 chapters is sibling Dex.
Yeah.
They are restless.
Yes.
They are discontent with their life. First at the start of the book, and then 2 years later as a tea monk.
Right.
They're looking for something,
Yeah.
for some sort of change, for crickets maybe.
Maybe.
But I still don't think, I'm not convinced 4 chapters in that even Dex knows what they're looking for.
No.
There's this moment of elation when they camp out in the forest,
Mhm.
in the wilderness, that first night right before they meet Moscap. Quote, "Nobody in the world knows where I am right now," they thought. And the notion of that filled them with bubbling excitement. They had canceled their life, bailed out on a whim, end quote.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a win. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so Dex, you got what you wanted.
Right.
But to me, that actually reads more like just the adrenaline rush and the initial excitement
Yeah.
of doing something a little out of your comfort
Yeah.
zone, you know?
Almost
like
taboo.
a little crazy,
yeah,
you know?
a little out
Like,
there.
I'm off the beaten path.
Yeah.
Let's see where this goes.
Right.
I think Dex kind of craves that feeling
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
And they're out here doing it on this first night. So
Right.
everything feels kind of cool and awesome.
Right.
I wonder, though, will that feeling wear off as they continue their journey? Is this what will make Dex happy in the long term? And maybe on a more philosophical level, is there any one thing that will
Yeah.
make you happy on the long term of your entire life?
Yeah.
I'm also curious what you think. That's kind of where my head is at.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Like, what's at the heart of Dex's restlessness in this story?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and I think it's clearly one of the things that Becky Chambers wants us to contemplate.
Yeah.
If I had to answer, I would say, life is kind of a series of becoming. It's not that there is a
Obssa. Oh my God.
I think that's where I end.
I'm gonna need a moment after that. Wow.
And in any case, that there isn't a clear destination for all of us. There isn't a clear path to this thing that I don't think we really ever reach. Like, we are constantly evolving,
Yeah.
and the feeling of restlessness, I think, is deeply human, and it's not something to really fight per se. Like, it's sometimes you're restless because you need to move, and that natural tension between where
Yeah.
you are and what you are becoming and where you should go, I think is very healthy.
Yeah.
And I don't see it as really as something to overcome per se, but
Interesting.
more
Yes.
something to accept. And I tend to think that is perhaps some of the lesson that Dex will learn in their travels with Moscap. And we've already started to get some hints at this, and the way that Moscap talks about robot civilization. And it's odd. It almost strikes me as being it's hard to say. Like, in I think chapter 4, Moscap has a pretty nice rebuttal to something that Dex says, and Dex is kind of objecting to referring to Moscap and other robots as it, and Moscap is a little offended, actually,
Yeah.
and says, quote, "I would never call you just an animal sibling, Dex. We don't have to fall into the same category to be of equal value." I found that to be pretty interesting and profound, and especially as we're contemplating things like AI and in modern life, it kind of presents this interesting mirror to humanity and perhaps our own path for growth as well.
Yeah.
It is one of maybe greater acceptance of the very wide variety of lives and sentiences that are developing and that have developed. And I think that is kind of at the heart of Dex's journey, is
Right.
like in confronting their own sense of, I don't know, of like uncertainty that maybe part of that is coming to accept that that's part of the narrative of life, that
Right.
is one of the things that we have to grapple with, but ultimately is healthy.
Yeah. And that change is a constant.
Yes.
Perhaps one of the only constants
Right.
is that life will always be changing.
Right.
And it's interesting, we've talked about utopia, dystopia, and the idea of stagnation, because utopias are inherently stagnant,
Right.
in which change is limited or not happening.
Right.
And I think Dex, a person who lives within that utopia, is uncomfortable with that, is uncomfortable with things not changing.
Right.
And so forces things in their own life to change, or takes these steps to embrace change.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Dex is almost pushing against the utopian society of which they are a part of.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty bold idea.
I agree.
And I think Dex, for what it's worth, is embracing something that perhaps Dex's peers are not.
Right. Right.
Because of the society they live in.
Right.
Where like the status quo is the comfort, is the cozy.
Right.
Dex is okay with a bit of discomfort.
Yeah.
Biking through wilderness.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like fun.
Yeah.
But
with no training also. They also embarked on this whole thing, and they were rejected formal training.
Oh my gosh. Didn't even read one book about it. God damn it, Dex. I love it. Okay, the other dilemma I wanted to touch on, moving away from Dex for a bit, is kind of in the background right now in the story, might come to the forefront in this back half of it, but we do have this relationship between humans and robots, right?
Right.
200 years.
Yes.
They have not interacted ever since robots gained sentience,
Yeah.
basically, a consciousness.
Yeah.
This is a historic moment that Dex and Moscap are meeting.
Yeah.
First time humanity and robots have come in contact in this way. And it raises a couple of questions for me.
Yeah.
One, does Moscap's like little outreach mission here that it's on, does it mean that the robots are considering reintegrating with humanity?
Interesting.
Why the check-in, right?
Yeah.
Like, have we been told the true motivation behind this check-in with humanity again?
Good question.
Because it's been 200 years of radio silence.
Yeah.
What changed?
Right.
That's the question I'm asking.
Right.
Obviously, the follow-up there is, can that happen peacefully? Right now, there's a peaceful status quo. Robots in the wilderness, do your thing.
Yeah.
Humanity does our thing. We only interact peacefully or not at all.
Yeah.
What happens if robots suddenly are like, can we come back?
Right.
Can we start living in those tree houses with you?
Right.
Does that shake up the status quo?
Yeah.
Does that cause too much change for people to accept?
Right.
The other question, I guess, is even more personal to the robots for me. Like, I'm wondering why they want to reintegrate.
Yeah.
You know, like, is it because something has happened to them out in the wilderness and they want to come back to civilization? Is it simple curiosity?
Yeah.
Or, my sort of headcanon, is it just leftover innate programming within them?
Right.
To check in with their humans
Right.
and make sure their humans' needs are filled.
Right.
What they were initially built for.
Right.
To assist humans.
Yeah.
Is this some sort of deep in the quote unquote DNA or the code, the source code of these robots?
Right.
Are they feeling a pull, a subconscious pull
to
come back and serve humanity?
Right.
And is that why Moscap is here to do so?
Yeah.
Just some things, like some questions, some speculation that's been running through my mind as I think more about these chapters. It's really interesting to consider that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That feels like a bit of wild speculation on my part.
I don't know. I like that take. I like the questions you're raising there.
But I think it raises some interesting questions. And I think it is a dilemma at the core of this book that I am seeking answers to.
Right.
I don't know that we'll get clear-cut answers, but I hope we at least explore it further.
I agree. Why don't we pivot slightly here?
Sure.
Talk about the leap year.
Yes.
We like to get into the leap of faith that the book asks of us as readers. And I think this book has a couple. It's got a couple. We should unpack these. Well, first and foremost, I think as we've underscored, this is a solar punk future. This is a super hopeful, optimistic glimpse at a future where humans and nature and robots live in perfect harmony.
Right.
It's a decidedly optimistic vision, and it's, I think, probably best exemplified by the parting promise that humans made to robots.
This is juicy.
Quote, guaranteed complete freedom of travel in human territories and rights equal to that of any Pangan citizen. Which is interesting.
Wow. That's the agreement they came to.
Yeah.
Humans and robots.
Yeah, you tell me. I mean, how does that strike you? I think you can tell by our laughter. The most likely? I don't know.
That's a wild response, right?
I would
right?
agree.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Because again, the inciting incident 200-ish years ago was that these robots, our robot underlings, my fucking robot vacuum, obtained consciousness all of a sudden, and it has never been explained.
Right.
We don't know why.
Yeah.
And for that inciting incident to result in a parting promise made between humans and robots that is so kind, so full of trust, right?
Yeah.
Like my instinct, my assumption would be my robot's going to want to kill me now.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
But rather than suspicion and violence, these two, I guess, species, these two
I
groups.
think we have to refer to them as species. Sentient.
They're sentient now. They have found an amicable way to live peacefully and separately.
On equal terms.
Yeah. The rights equal to that of any Pangan citizen?
Yeah. Interesting.
Gosh, it's even more interesting when you consider that humanity, Dex reveals this in their conversations, humanity has doubled down on no longer dabbling in robotics.
Right.
They just don't make robots anymore.
That's right.
Because they gained consciousness once.
Yeah.
Who are we to dabble in that again?
Right.
That's crazy.
Right.
Can you imagine humanity having that amount of restraint?
No. That, we're talking about leaps of faith here. That feels like a leap of faith there. You know?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
There was more in these chapters about the parting promise I found interesting too. There was a bit about like humanity, as in won't make contact or approach you first until you make contact with us first. It gives the robots
it seeds
more agency in this negotiation.
Yeah.
In what world in a negotiation does one group just continue to give more to the other?
Yeah.
It is very hopeful, to borrow a term from you from earlier.
Yeah.
It is very hopeful.
That's very helpful, yeah.
If that inciting incident of robot consciousness were to happen in our world, I don't know that we'd come to a parting promise that's this hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, to just kind of probe what about that feels like such a leap of faith, which, we don't really need to probe that hard.
Sure, yeah.
But I mean, for many of us who grew up with, like the Terminator, a robot Armageddon viscerally feels more familiar and, likely perhaps.
Yeah.
I would quote Kevin Kelly again. I'm kind of obsessed with this book.
Sure. Yeah.
Who writes, who can't imagine an apocalyptic last person on Earth finale, or a world run by robot overlords, or a mega city planet slowly disintegrating into slums, or easiest of all, a simple nuclear Armageddon. All that said, I don't think that makes dystopias more likely, but it does make their opposite harder to buy.
Yes.
It's almost sad to say.
Weird balance there.
Yeah. It's almost sad to say, but it almost requires a much greater leap of faith to imagine even a mildly optimistic future scenario.
Gosh, and how sad is that?
Yeah.
That makes me sad.
Yeah.
That I can read a dystopian book and go, yeah, probably.
That seems likely. Flip on Severance. Yeah, that seems about right. That's the trajectory. Yeah.
A world in which Terminator feels more realistic than someone going around giving tea.
Yeah.
Or robots coexisting with humanity.
Yeah. Or humanity coexisting with nature.
With nature. Oh, we've barely touched on the nature stuff. Half this planet is a protected nature zone.
Yeah, which is incredible. Yeah.
Tree houses, so we don't destroy the forest floor.
That maybe is actually the greatest leap of faith.
That's
the disrespect we showed to planet Earth is it's pretty egregious.
Yeah. And again, like I don't sound incredulous because I hate that part of the book or anything.
Of course.
I sound incredulous because it's sad that that's my reaction to this. That I read a book that is so hopeful and a world that feels so right.
Yeah. And we like.
Yeah. That just doesn't feel like a world that could happen. And I think a lot of sci-fi is speculating about a future that could happen.
Yeah.
And as much as I'm intrigued by this like hope core, comfy solar punk genre, that future, unfortunately, especially given the realities of like what we're going through now in 2025, like feels further and further and further away every single day.
All that said, I mean, I have to appreciate Becky Chambers for putting a book out like this that does serve to, in some ways, inspire, if not hope in an alternative future.
Yeah. Then at least a framework.
Right?
Like, that's the thing that I think it's easy to be jaded, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to read Terminator, like watch Terminator. It's easy to read a dystopian book and go, yeah, we're fucked. That's where it's going.
And accept it.
Accept that as inevitable.
Yeah.
To quote, what's his name? Kevin
Kelly, yeah.
The inevitable.
Yeah.
But I think it is quite brave.
Yes.
To say, what if not that though?
Yeah.
What if we said 50% of Earth's continents are untouchable safe zones from humanity?
Yeah.
crazy idea,
Yeah.
but like, hear me out.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Becky Chambers is kind of doing
Yeah.
with this book. Like, crazy idea,
Yeah.
but hear me out.
Yes.
And I think just creating that framework is such a brave act.
Absolutely.
Just painting that picture of what could be.
Yes.
And I don't think there's anything wrong in aiming for a utopia,
No.
knowing we will fall short.
We'll
right?
absolutely fall short.
We will never achieve
Yeah.
the world of Penga. But why not try?
Yeah.
Why not say, how close can we get to 50% of Earth's most important ecosystems being
Yes.
protected from human capitalism?
Yes.
We'll never hit 50%.
No. But if we hit 10%,
10%?
that would be
That-
better.
Like, that would transform the face of the
Absolutely.
Earth. Like,
yeah.
so I think, like, I am quite inspired by how much this book is, like, asking its readers to dream
Yes.
about a better reality.
Yeah. What a lovely way to put it. Absolutely. We need to dream. We need to envision a world that we would want to live in
Yeah.
and not, our more likely enslavement by our robot overlords.
Right. Chat GPT in the future, if you're listening,
We love you.
we love you. Well, let's moving on from that leap of faith
Yeah.
that this book is asking us. Let's talk about some of this. It's a sci-fi book, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the gadgets. We
Yes.
always like touching on this
Yeah.
in a book as well, because yes, a lot of sci-fi isn't focused on the gadgetry, and
Yeah.
that's sort of in the background in the world
Yeah.
building. Other sci-fi, it's front and center. It's
Absolutely.
like part of the main plot.
Yeah.
I think this book falls in the former.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gadgetry-ish
Ish.
stuff.
Yeah.
It's not like high-tech stuff.
Yeah.
It's not Star Trek. It's not Silicon
Yeah.
Valley shit.
No.
But there is technology and some gadgets in here that are worth just sort of touching on.
Yeah.
And talking about that are part of the world building.
Yeah, I think so. Early on, Dex is gifted, and I'm not entirely sure what makes it an ox bike,
Oxbike?
but yes, an ox bike. I see in the notes here you've got
Yeah.
AKA electric bike,
Right.
which, yeah, it doesn't,
Maybe.
we haven't heard a fuel source. So actually, there are solar panels, I believe, on the.
Okay.
I might
Maybe
just
there was
be
a throwaway
hallucinating
line
that.
of,
but,
maybe.
There is mention, however, as far as energy sources go, of balcony wind turbines.
Yes.
Which is cool.
Cool.
Yeah, would like to have
Again, that balance with nature.
Yeah. I see here you've got the portable computer that is built to last forever.
Hell yeah. Get fucked. Planned obsolescence.
Ah, that kills me.
that was a hilarious line.
Yes, I agree.
It's so funny. But also the fact that Dex was, there doesn't seem to be social media
Right.
in this world.
Right. Yeah.
And this portable computer, which, whatever, is like a laptop or an iPhone or
Yeah.
something, an iPad,
Yeah.
wasn't a thing that made Dex unhappy.
Yeah.
It was a thing where Dex got lovely messages from their
Right.
parents,
Right.
or from their
From the
customers,
yes.
and it was a way for Dex to communicate their schedule
Yes.
with, it was a very useful tool that Dex only used when they needed to and then
Yeah.
put away.
Exactly what we kind of want phones
What
to
we
be for
want?
us.
Yeah, that's maybe,
Laptop.
again, speaking of
yeah.
envisioning
Yeah.
with the ideal,
Right.
that's kind of what we want our phones
That's
to
what
be.
we want, yeah.
Useful when we need them,
Yeah.
and then to never be a
Right.
part of our
And
lives
a way
again.
to keep in touch with our community. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, so I really liked that, and I just loved the added jab of also this shit never breaks. You don't need to get on some iPhone upgrade program.
Exactly. 1800. 1800. What are we talking about here?
Right.
Yeah.
Dex is still rocking the iPhone 4,
Yeah,
baby.
exactly.
It's never gonna
Four
break.
for life.
I loved it.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
loved it.
We've also got a few other things that are less techy, but kind of interesting. As mentioned, there are the treehouse homes suspended above the forest floor to protect
Yeah,
the soil and its inhabitants.
beautiful.
There's mention of worm farms, which might be a thing in present day reality. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, worm farmers, email us. Is that a real
Got a
thing?
lot of listeners in the worm farm community. There's also just the ever-present in all sci-fi mention of graphene,
Love it.
which has
Iconic.
never lived
Is it
up to its
sci-fi if you
promise.
don't mention graphene?
It can't be. And we've also got Fab Shacks, which are basically 3D printer shops.
That's such a cool name
I
for
like
it.
it.
Why do we call them 3D printers?
Yeah.
That's so like corporate and Microsoft.
Absolutely. We
Fab-
also
Fab
printers are
Shack.
horrible too. Like, nobody's ever loved it. They always break down.
Right.
And yeah.
Somehow
so-
your toner is always out for some reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Paper's
Fab
always
Shack
getting
is awesome.
jammed in it. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Girl, you want to go to the Fab Shack? It's also what I call my bachelor pad, you know? The Fab Shack.
Oh, I love it. And that's mainly all that we encounter. They've got kind of an alternative currency that's mentioned and kind of a throwaway moment as Pebs. Which, I'm curious for that. Maybe Pebbles?
Pebbles.
Maybe is that what?
I was going to say, that kind of that kind of spoke to me as like another nature thing.
Right.
Like even money is like pebbles, rocks.
Yeah.
There's some like nature connection there.
Right.
Yeah. Some fun behind the scenes world building, gadgetry, and tech that is very in balance with nature, I think.
Doesn't overwhelm the reader. Doesn't overwhelm
not at all.
them. It's like really and kind of it's centered around human life, and it's not it's not the end all be all. We're not seeking to create bigger and better and greater and more technology. It's really kind of in the background.
Yeah. There's a balance.
There's a balance.
And humanity in this story has achieved a balance.
Yeah.
In its relationship with technology, in its relationship with nature,
Yes.
in its relationship with the robots.
Yeah.
We've achieved a balance that I think we can all aspire toward.
Yeah.
What a great read.
I agree.
I can't wait to get into the second half of this book.
Only 4 more chapters, but
it's
looking forward to them.
Yeah, I am too. Okay, well, that wraps up our conversation today. So fun. As always, Obssa.
Of course.
A lot of what we talked about today isn't in our script in front of us right now. Like we ended up just winding deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
But I always love this because like I love that we managed through our conversations to like dig at something deeper that both of us were maybe feeling but couldn't articulate in the script.
Much like sibling decks, we like to meander. We like to wander.
That's right.
That's right.
See where the podcast takes us.
Exactly.
Well, here's where the podcast is going to take all of us next. We have homework for you, dear listener. For the next episode of Science Fiction Book Club, make sure that you have finished A Psalm for the Wild Build.
That's right.
It's a short book. There's only 4 more chapters, so make sure you've read the rest of the book before our next episode comes out. If you're wondering what the reading assignments are, what the due dates are, when's the next episode, check out the links in the show notes below. We always post the entire schedule for the entire season, so you'll know exactly what to read, when to read it, and when you got to get that hold in at the library.
That's right. Well, friends, we know there's a gravity to leaving a place for good, a deep sense of seismic change. But fortunately, as long as you keep on listening and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, we'll be here for many utopias, dystopias, and everything in between. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party on those portable computers that are built to last forever. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, there might be something good here. Something exciting or nourishing. Something to replace the weariness of the day. More likely, it'll just be a podcast about sci-fi books. That's more of our thing here, I think.
But maybe that's almost as good?
Almost as good.
I'll take it.
Reach for the utopia, knowing you'll never make it. That's the 5 of this podcast.
We'll never make it.
Reach for great podcast. Put out good podcast.
But better than mediocre podcast.
That's right, you know?